All right, so are you ready to dive into a world that you might think you know, but trust me, you don't used cars?
Oh, yeah.
But this is way more fascinating
What?
than just your local dealership.
All right.
You actually sent us an interview with an expert in used car exports, and let me tell you the stuff he talks about.
Oh, wow.
Blew my mind.
It's a market that most people don't even think about, but it's a multi-billion-dollar industry with connections to everything from geopolitics to environmental regulations.
Exactly. And so get this, your stack actually focused on South Korea's role in this market.
Interesting.
Did you know that they exported over 630,000 used cars in 2024 alone?
Yeah, and that's worth a staggering $5.2 billion US dollars.
Wow.
To put that in perspective, that's a five-fold increase in just the past 10 years.
Wow.
They're actually outpacing their own new car exports.
Okay, so clearly there's a demand for Korean used cars.
For sure.
What makes them so special in the global market?
Well, a few things, actually. Korean cars have built a solid reputation for quality and affordability. You know, that bang for your buck factor.
Yeah, makes sense. People are always looking for a good deal, especially in a used car.
Right.
But it's a global market, right?
It is a global market.
Not every country drives on the same side of the road.
Oh, that's true. That's a good point.
How does that play into this?
Right, and that's another advantage Korean cars have.
Oh, okay.
Most of them are left-hand drive,
Oh.
which opens up a much larger market compared to, say, Japanese used cars.
So they can tap into more countries without having to modify the cars?
Exact.
Clever. But how do these cars actually get from Korea to their destinations? Are we talking massive cargo ships?
It's actually a bit more nuanced than that.
Okay.
There are three main ways Korean used cars get exported, each with its own kind of personality, you could say.
Okay, let's hear it.
Okay.
Walk us through these export methods.
First up, we've got what's called yard sales.
Yard sales?
Imagine massive, informal used car lots kind of springing up organically in places like Incheon.
So like a used car bazaar.
Exactly. Foreign buyers from all over the world flock to these yards because of the sheer volume and the chance to haggle for deals in person.
That sounds intense.
Yeah.
Is it all just a free-for-all?
It can be a bit chaotic, but it's a system that clearly works.
Yeah.
This informal approach has actually made Incheon the hub of Korean used car exports.
Wow, so it's all about that direct on-the-ground hustle.
Pretty much.
That's method one. What about the other two?
Okay.
How do they compare?
The second method is a bit more structured.
Okay.
It's your typical business-to-business export model. Think of exporters building relationships with overseas buyers and fulfilling those larger orders.
So more like traditional import-export.
Exactly.
But with used cars?
Yep.
Is there a downside to this method?
Well, one of the big challenges for Korean used car exporters is the lack of financing options.
Oh, really?
They often have to rely heavily on credit, which could be risky if payments get delayed or, deals fall through.
Oh, so it's interesting how something we take for granted in other businesses, like getting a loan, can be a major hurdle in this market.
Absolutely.
So we've got the chaotic energy of the yard sales and the more traditional B2B deals. What's the third method?
The third method is the most ambitious Korean companies actually setting up shop abroad to directly access local markets.
Wow, that's a bold move.
It is.
Where are they focusing these overseas ventures?
Chile's a prime example.
Okay.
They've set up operations in the Cake region, which has unique regulations that make it a hotspot for used car imports.
Oh, interesting.
Another area is the UAE, with its free zones, offering attractive incentives for foreign businesses.
So it's all about finding those strategic locations where the regulations and the market conditions are in your favor.
For sure.
But I imagine there are also risks involved, right?
Absolutely.
Not every venture is a success story.
You have to be incredibly adaptable and savvy. About a decade ago, the Russian market for Korean used cars was booming, but then the government suddenly imposed stricter import regulations.
Oh.
And the whole thing collapsed almost overnight.
Oof, that's a tough lesson to learn.
Yeah, it was.
I guess it highlights how global events can completely reshape these markets.
Yeah.
Even if those events seem totally unrelated at first.
It's true. You're right. Things can add quickly.
Wow.
And speaking of unexpected connections, did you know that conflict can actually drive demand for used cars?
Wait, what? War and used cars? How are those two things linked?
It might seem counterintuitive,
Yeah.
but when conflict disrupts established systems,
Right.
there's often a sudden need for essential goods, including vehicles.
Interesting.
Governments might ease up on import restrictions like age limits or emission standards to get those goods flowing into the country quickly.
So it's less about red tape and more about getting people what they need to survive and rebuild in a crisis.
Exactly.
And I guess that creates a big opportunity for used car exporters who can step in and meet that demand.
Exactly. We saw this happen recently in Syria after the rebel faction took control. Demand for used cars skyrocketed. We're talking prices jumping by millions of Korean won practically overnight.
Wow. So if you could predict global instability, you could make a fortune in the used car market. Okay, maybe that's a bit too cynical.
Yeah.
But it really highlights how unpredictable this market can be.
Let's just say it's sensitive to global events, even those that seem unrelated on the surface.
Okay, so we've talked about how Korean used cars get exported.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm curious about where they're going.
Okay.
What are some of the key destinations and what makes each market unique?
Let's start with Libya.
Okay.
It was the top export destination in 2024, with over 125,000 cars shipped there.
Wow.
But here's the thing.
Okay.
Libya isn't just a market in itself. It's a hub for the entire North African region.
So it's like a giant used car distribution center.
Right.
Cars come in and then they fan out to all the surrounding countries.
Exactly. And there's another layer to this. Remember how we talked about relaxed regulations during times of conflict?
Uh-huh.
Well, the ongoing internal conflict in Libya has made it difficult for the government to collect taxes effectively.
Oh.
This makes it a very attractive market for used car importers who are looking to avoid paying duties.
Ah, so it's not just about the demand, it's also about taking advantage of loopholes in the system.
Right.
It's fascinating how these seemingly unrelated factors all come together.
Now let's switch gears and head over to Chile. Remember I mentioned Korean companies setting up shop in the Iquique region?
Yeah, the place with the unique regulations.
Exactly.
What's the story there?
Well, Iquique, which is a relatively poor region, is the only place in all of Chile where used car imports are allowed.
Wait, so the rest of Chile has basically banned used car imports?
Basically, yeah.
Why would they do that?
It's all about protecting the domestic car industry.
Okay.
But there's also an environmental aspect to it.
Okay.
To mitigate concerns about pollution cars older than 2014 can only be driven within Iquique.
So they're trying to strike a balance between economic development and environmental protection. Interesting how those regulations shape the market.
Now, for our final destination, let's travel to Central Asia, specifically Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan.
Okay, what's happening in Central Asia? Why are they on the used car map?
These countries are importing a lot more high-value used cars than their economies would suggest. There's a reason for that. They're acting as a backdoor for exports to Russia.
I see. Russia is currently facing sanctions, so they're using these Central Asian countries as a way to get around those restrictions. It's like a game of cat and mouse on a global scale.
You got it. And to add another layer of complexity, each region has its own specific preferences when it comes to used cars.
Oh, okay.
For example, North Africa prefers gasoline cars due to the low fuel quality there.
That makes sense. So you can't just ship any old car to any country. You really have to understand the nuances of each market.
Right.
What about Russia? What are they looking for?
Given their climate, they favor newer luxury SUVs, think rugged vehicles built to handle tough conditions. Mercedes G-Wagons are particularly sought after there.
Oh, wow.
On the other end of the spectrum, you have a market like Jordan, which is incredibly picky about quality. Even minor imperfections can be a deal breaker.
Wow. So it's not just about getting cars into these countries. It's about understanding the cultural preferences and the practical needs of each market. You really have to do your homework.
Absolutely. And beyond the data and the trends, there's also a human element to this global market. We're talking about people from all over the world buying and selling cars, negotiating deals.
I'd love to hear about your personal experiences dealing with buyers from different countries.
Sure.
Any standout stories or cultural insights you can share?
Oh, definitely. For instance, Middle Eastern buyers have a reputation for being tough negotiators. They'll push hard for the best possible price, which makes every deal a bit of a chess match.
So you have to be prepared to go back and forth.
You do.
Anticipate their moves and hold your ground.
Exactly. You need to be strategic and patient.
Interesting.
But one thing that surprised me was how important respect and trust are in these interactions.
Oh.
Even though you're dealing with people from vastly different cultures and backgrounds, you find ways to communicate, build rapport, and ultimately make the deal happen.
It's a reminder that even in a market as seemingly transactional as used cars, human connection still plays a huge role.
It does. It's all about understanding and respecting those differences.
This has been an incredible journey so far. We've gone from massive used car yards in Korea to the bustling markets of North Africa and the rugged terrain of Russia, all in the span of a few minutes.
No, we've only just scratched the surface.
Right. There's so much more to unpack. We'll be back after a quick break to delve even deeper into this fascinating world of used car exports. You know, before we jumped into all the different destinations and regional quirks, you mentioned something that really stuck with me.
Oh, yeah?
You said Korean companies are mostly reacting to foreign buyers coming to them.
Yeah, that's right.
What's fascinating here is, couldn't they be more proactive in this global market?
Absolutely. It's a huge opportunity they haven't fully tapped into. Right now, they're leaving a lot of potential profit on the table.
So instead of waiting for the phone to ring, so to speak, they could be out there strategically targeting these markets and building their own export networks.
Yeah.
But what would that actually look like in practice? What would it take for them to make that shift?
Well, the first step is really understanding the market.
Okay.
They need in-depth research to figure out what each region needs and wants. One size fits all definitely doesn't work in the used car export game.
So no more assuming a car that's popular in Libya will be a hit in Chile. They need to tailor their offerings to each specific market.
Precisely, they'd also need to build strong relationships with local partners. Having someone on the ground who knows the ins and outs of the local business culture and regulations would be invaluable.
It's all about who you know, right? Building those trust networks is crucial,
It is.
especially when you're dealing with international trade.
Referencing is key in any business, but even more so in this kind of global market. And then there's the financing hurdle we talked about earlier.
Right, that lack of readily available financing for exporters, it seems like that's a recurring issue holding them back.
Yeah, if Korean companies want to be major players on the world stage, they've got to find ways around that. Maybe that's government support, maybe it's partnerships with international financial institutions. There are options out there,
Okay.
but it all comes back to strategy and commitment.
Okay, so it's market research, local connections, and creative financing. It sounds like a pretty complex puzzle,
It can be.
but it makes me think, why should we even care about Korean used car exports in the first place? What makes this whole topic relevant to our listeners?
That's a great question. This might seem like a niche topic, but it really shines a light on how interconnected the world is.
Okay.
We often think of used cars as a local thing, but it's a global phenomenon with economic, environmental, even political ripple effects.
It's like we're all driving on the same road, metaphorically speaking. What happens in one corner of the world impacts what happens everywhere else.
Exactly. And it constantly changes. Just think about how the rise of electric vehicles is going to disrupt this whole market. That's a game changer in the making.
Oh, man. Yeah, as more people adopt EVs, what happens to all those gasoline-powered used cars?
Right.
Where do they go? That's a whole other deep dive waiting to happen. But I think one of the most valuable things this conversation has highlighted is the importance of critical thinking.
How so?
Well, we've seen how something like a war in Syria or sanctions on Russia can create unexpected opportunities in the used car market. It makes you realize that you can't just focus on your little corner of the world. You have to be aware of what's happening globally and be able to connect those dots.
Absolutely. It's about looking beyond the surface and understanding the forces shaping our world, even the ones that seem totally unrelated at first glance.
And being able to adapt to those changes.
Yeah.
Because clearly things can shift on a dime in this market.
For sure.
So as we wrap up our time together, what's one thought you'd like to leave our listener with, something to really ponder after this deep dive?
We've focused on the business side of things, the trends, the strategies, but there's another layer here that's just as important: ethics, as these Korean companies expand their reach globally. They have a responsibility to do so in a way that's sustainable and ethical.
Okay.
That means fair labor practices, minimizing environmental impact, being transparent in their dealings.
It's not just about maximizing profits. It's about doing business in a way that benefits everyone involved.
Exactly.
This deep dive has been a wild ride full of surprises and insights I never would have expected. And on that note, a huge thank you to you for sharing your expertise and for taking us on this journey.
It was my pleasure. Always happy to delve into the unexpected corners of the world.
And to our listener, thanks for diving in with us. If this sparked your curiosity, let us know what other topics you'd like us to explore. We're always up for a challenge. I don't know about you, but I'm still processing all that.
Yeah.
Who knew used cars could be so complicated?
It's really not what you think of at first when you think
Yeah.
global market, but that's what's so fun about it.
Yeah,
There's always more to learn than you expect.
right. It really makes you realize how much we just take for granted, like just assuming things are simple when there's all these intricate systems at play.
Absolutely. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion. The deeper you go, the more you discover.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into this unexpected world, what are some key takeaways you want our listener to walk away with?
Sure.
What really stands out to you after all this?
For me, it's the sheer scale of it all.
Okay.
We tend to think of used cars as a very localized thing,
Right.
but it's this massive global
Yeah.
web connecting economies, cultures, even political landscapes.
It's like that butterfly effect thing, right? One seemingly small decision can create ripples halfway across the world.
Exactly, and it's constantly in motion. We talked about how conflict can boost demand in some regions, but then you have things like environmental regulations or the rise of electric vehicles completely reshaping the game.
So adaptability is key.
Definitely.
You can't just rely on the same strategies that worked 5 years ago. You got to be able to read the signals, anticipate those shifts, and adjust your course.
Exactly. And that's where research and analysis become so crucial. It's not enough to just react to events as they unfold. You have to be proactive, understand the underlying trends, and make informed decisions.
It's like having a good map and compass
Yeah,
when you're navigating uncharted territory.
that's a great analogy. You need the tools and the knowledge to navigate this complex landscape, and that's what we've tried to provide in this deep dive.
Yeah, this has been incredible.
It has.
We've gone from those bustling used car yards in Incheon to the back roads of Central Asia, uncovering the hidden connections and the forces driving this global market.
And hopefully sparked some curiosity in our listener along the way.
Absolutely. So to our listener, if you're feeling inspired to learn more, keep that momentum going, dig deeper into the topics that piqued your interest. You never know what fascinating insights you might uncover.
And if this deep dive sparked any questions or thoughts, we'd love to hear from you. Share your insights. Challenge our assumptions. Keep the conversation going.
That's what this is all about, right? Learning, exploring, and sharing those aha moments with each other. Thanks for joining us on this adventure into the world of used car exports. Until next time, happy exploring.